Do you recognize one of the grandest ships that ever carried the British flag? The Mauretania, Queen of the Atlantic. Surely it is possible for practical as well as sentimental reasons to save the Mauretania as well as the Olympic from the scrap heap. Who knows but that we may need all our shipping in the near future? Is it too late to step in and preserve these ships from destruction?
At the turn of the century, Britain's once dominant position in the North Atlantic merchant shipping trade suddenly felt on the verge of collapse. In 1902, J.P. Morgan formed the International Mercantile Marine Company and aggressively began purchasing controlling stakes in a number of shipping lines, including the Dominion Line, the Red Star Line, the Leyland Line, and most concerningly, the White Star Line, in an attempt to monopolize the North Atlantic shipping trade. While the International Mercantile Marine would ultimately fail, the rapid consolidation and foreign control of British shipping was a cause of great concern for the Admiralty. The fear was that in the event of a war, the United Kingdom would not be able to draw on the White Star Line's vast fleet, depriving them of valuable armed merchant cruisers and the ability to move troops and equipment across their vast empire. At the same time, the new era of one-upsmanship and heightened nationalism between European powers produced a new wave of large and fast German liners that wrestled the speed record away from the United Kingdom for the first time in nearly 50 years. The growing anxiety that Britain's days of Atlantic superiority were waning paved the way for an ambitious proposal from Cunard's chairman, who approached the government with a request for a subsidy for 2 express liners capable of a record-breaking 24.5 knots. Critically, the Admiralty demanded that these 2 new liners had to be built to strict specifications that would allow for easy conversion to auxiliary cruisers in the event of a war. These conditions required a double bottom, watertight compartments, coal bunkers positioned to protect engine spaces from raking fire, and strengthened decks that could support the installation of guns. A loan of £2.6 million was granted for the new liners, with a 2.75% interest rate to be paid over the period of 20 years. Names for the new ships were debated as early as November 1904. Suggestions included Stampalia and Octania, Britannia and Hesperia, and Albania and Moravia, among many others. The 2 liners would be built in tandem at their respective shipyards, following designs laid out by Cunard's senior naval architect Leonard Pescott. Lusitania, named for the Roman province located in the western Iberian Peninsula, would be built at John Brown & Co. on the River Clyde. The second liner, assigned yard number 735, would be constructed by the Tyneside firm of Swan Hunter and Wigham Richardson Limited. Her keel was laid down on August 18, 1904, only 1 day after her sister. Their designs prioritized speed above all else, and construction on the aft section of both ships was delayed as the proper necessary machinery was debated. There was a desire to use the experimental new steam turbine engine developed by Charles Parsons. His steam turbine concept was popularized by an experimental vessel named Turbinia, built by Parsons in 1894 and demonstrated at the Spithead Naval Review of 1897. The tiny, pencil-thin, steam turbine-driven craft, outfitted with 9 propellers, achieved an incredible speed of over 34 knots. Soon the Royal Navy began experimenting with the technology, but by the time Cunard's new superliners were being designed, turbines had yet to prove themselves on a vessel anywhere near the scale that would be required. Much like White Star would later do when constructing the Olympic class, Cunard ordered a test before moving forward with the experimental technology. This test was carried out in 2 20,000-ton liners being constructed at the time, known as the Pretty Sisters. RMS Coronia would be equipped with reliable quadruple expansion steam engines, while her sister, RMS Carmania, was equipped with the new steam turbines. During trials, Carmania achieved a full knot faster, giving Cunard the confidence they needed to move forward with the technology and their two most important liners, and work proceeded at Swan Hunter. On a rainy September 20th, 1906, the Mauretania, named for the Roman province located in the northwest African coast, was launched. She was christened by the Dowager Duchess of Roxburgh. The launch was carefully timed down to the minute to coincide with the highest possible tide on the River Tyne. She glided effortlessly into the water at 14 knots and would soon begin her year-long fitting-out process. At the time of her launch, the Mauretania was the largest ship in the world, claiming the title from her sister, the Lusitania, which was launched only 3 months before. She would maintain the title until the launch of the Olympic in 1910. Having just launched the first 2 British four-stackers, the Cunard Line had a lot to be proud of. But the work of proving their new liners to the world and reclaiming the Blue Riband for the United Kingdom had only just begun. In total, the Mauretania took 13 million man-hours to build. She came in at 31,938 tons, with a length of 790 feet and a beam of 88 feet. She could accommodate 2,165 passengers and 802 crew members. Unlike the Olympic class, the interior designs of the Lusitania and Mauretania were planned and built by separate design teams, giving each ship a unique interior scheme. The contract for Mauretania's first-class interiors was awarded to Harold Peto, an architect who loved the Italian Renaissance and the arts and crafts movement. The fitting out was handled by 2 London design firms, Melior & Co. and Turner Lord & Co. Her first-class spaces occupied 5 decks, with the majority of her public rooms situated on her boat deck. The forwardmost of these spaces was her library and writing room, fitted out by Melior & Co. and decorated in a Louis XVI style, with sycamore paneling stained in a silver gray veneer that gave a shimmering marble effect accentuated with greenish gold gilding. The room was flanked with intricately carved bookcases and a white marble fireplace. The carpeting and curtains were a deep rose color, and the plush seating was upholstered in complementary colors with mahogany accents. The room was topped with a circular glass dome. Next came her grand staircase, which led to her dining saloon and embarkation hall. Fitted by Turner Lord & Co., the walls were lined with finely carved French walnut paneling, and her stairs wrapped around 2 lifts, which featured aluminum grillwork shaped like wrought iron. Aluminum was an unusual material for the time that saved 20 tons of weight. The flooring was India rubber, and the stairs were adorned with a delicate green carpeting. Another glass dome filled the space with daylight. Just after her staircase was her lounge and music room, fitted out by Melior & Co. This Louis XVI style space was lined with semicircular bay windows. Walls and columns were paneled in a dull polished mahogany with gold molding and lilac-colored Fleur de Pêche marble pilasters. The carpeting, furniture, and curtains were a cream color, decorated with a trellis-work design of laurels and roses. Once again, the room was topped with an oval wrought iron glass dome, and chandeliers with crystals that were secured in place so they wouldn't move with the ship's rolling. Further aft was her smoking room, fitted out by Turner Lord & Co. and decorated in a 16th century Italian style, with French walnut paneling and an inlaid sycamore border. Several alcoves gave the space a cozy intimacy. The centerpiece was a chimney with a large curved hood, carved from solid walnut and modeled after an example by Della Robbia. The room was topped by, you guessed it, another glass dome. The final first-class space located on the boat deck was the Veranda Cafe, a somewhat simple room with a design only decided very late in her fitting-out process. It was originally furnished with sturdy teak chairs, tables, and benches, with carpet runners laid over wooden decks. The aft end was left completely open, making the space somewhat useless for most of the year due to the harsh North Atlantic weather. After just 1 year of service, the cafe was enclosed and redecorated with a more attractive and comfortable wicker furnishings. But by far her most impressive public space was her dining saloon, fitted out by Melior & Co. The multi-level room spanned from D to C deck with a dome that reached into B deck, giving an impressive height of 28 feet and a seating capacity of 328 passengers. It was decorated in a Francis I style with straw-colored oak paneling and solid wood carvings. Chairs were upholstered in a deep pink and the carpet was a rich cerise red. The cream and gold dome with circular carvings depicting the signs of the zodiac was by far the most stunning interior feature of the ship. It was lit with concealed lights that created a brilliant glow, illuminating the entire space without any visible lamps, creating an unforgettable ethereal ambiance at night. First-class staterooms were fitted out by Turner Lord & Co. and ranged in style and elegance from regal and parlor suites that featured sitting rooms and ensuite bathrooms to simple single-berth cabins. Her second-class spaces were comfortable and appointed to a standard that rivaled the first-class spaces on many previous liners. And while bare and compact, her third-class spaces were clean, durable, and significantly more comfortable than the steerage spaces passengers would face on other liners at the time. In his book The Only Way to Cross, historian John Maxstone Graham points out that the Mauretania was not actually that luxurious of a ship. While she was an engineering marvel, her builders clearly prioritized speed over comfort. Her accommodations matched the standards of the time, but she didn't offer anything really innovative. This all became more apparent with the launch of the Olympic. Though slower, she was significantly larger and offered a host of amenities, including larger reception rooms, a swimming pool, Turkish baths, a gymnasium, a squash court, an a la carte restaurant separate from the dining saloon, and many more staterooms with private bathrooms. The Olympic class was also far less prone to rolling and offered a smoother voyage, free from the vibration issues that would plague both the Mauretania and her sister throughout their careers. Still, despite these faults, the Mauretania would of course soon prove to be a major hit. The Mauretania began her sea trial on September 18, 1907. As she was brought up to speed nearing 20 knots, vibrations began to heavily reverberate throughout the ship. These vibrations were so severe on her bridge that her commander ordered a full stop. When asked why, he replied, "Because I was being shaken off my bridge." To address these vibration issues, strengthening elements were added throughout the after sections of the liner, but this did little to solve the problem. The real cause of these violent vibrations was not her revolutionary steam turbines, but actually her propellers. While they represented the latest technology in propulsion at the time, the science was still in its relative infancy, and issues like cavitation were still poorly understood. Once the problem was determined, they had to wait a full year until she dropped a propeller at sea to justify replacements. In a testament to her incredible design, she completed 8 voyages with minimal disruption with just 3 propellers. When a replacement set was finally installed, her vibration issues were reduced considerably, but the problem was never fully eliminated. The other result of her trials that couldn't be disputed was her incredible speed capabilities. She quickly proved capable of achieving the 24.5 knot minimum speed set out by the Admiralty and easily exceeded 26 knots, teasing that the speed record would soon be hers. Needless to say, Cunard was pleased with their new liner, and they were eager to introduce her to the public, who of course immediately fell in love. The Mauretania left Liverpool for her maiden voyage on November 16, 1907. She was commanded by Captain John Pritchard. November is an unusually late date for a maiden voyage, and while her owners were eager to test her speed on the open Atlantic, she was plagued by rough weather for the entire westbound crossing. Seas were so rough that at one point her spare anchor broke free from her forecastle, taking 3 hours to secure. Several windows were shattered on her promenade deck and had to be patched with wooden plugs. Small streams of water were visible throughout the ship, and the teak railing above the bridge was damaged. While the voyage was generally a nightmare for her mostly seasick passengers, the weather cleared on the final day of the crossing, and Mauretania was able to offer a glimmer of her capabilities, achieving a record-breaking 624 nautical miles on that final day. On her eastbound crossing that left New York on November 30th, 1907, she would capture the Blue Riband with a 4-day, 22-hour, 33-minute crossing, traveling at 23.69 knots. While Lusitania would hold the title for the westbound crossing for a couple of years, the Mauretania would soon win that prize too, in 1909, making the crossing in 4 days, 10 hours, and 51 minutes, traveling at a speed of 26.06 knots. The Mauretania was an immediate hit with the public, who marveled at her size and speed. Along with the Lusitania, she was a major step forward, and it's hard to overstate the cultural impact they had on the general public. But these early years weren't without tragedy. In January 1914, while undergoing her annual refit, a gas cylinder exploded on one of her turbines. The explosion killed 4 workers and injured 6 more. The accident only caused minor damage, and the Mauretania returned to service 2 months later. This incident was only the beginning of the most challenging chapter of Mauretania's long career. While the clouds of war descended over Europe, Mauretania left Liverpool on Saturday, August 1, 1914, under the command of Captain James Charles. Crew desertions were unusually high leading up to the tense voyage. Just 2 days in, the German army invaded Belgium, and Great Britain responded with a declaration of war on August 4th. On the morning of August 5th, while surrounded by dense fog off Sable Island, about 600 nautical miles from New York, the Mauretania received a message from HMS Essex ordering her to change course for Halifax. She was immediately put over 90 degrees to starboard, jolting passengers as she sailed at her maximum possible speed for safety. Rumors of German warships operating off the American coast were top of mind for Captain Charles and his crew as they hurried to prepare the ship for hostilities. Ports were blacked out with canvas, exterior lights were turned off, promenades were shrouded in canvas, and exterior doors were locked. Passengers were not told that war had just broken out, but through rumors and the obvious wartime preparations, most could guess what was happening. The situation became even more obvious when the fog lifted, revealing that HMS Essex was now escorting the valuable liner. Mauretania arrived in Halifax in the early morning of August 6th. While in Halifax, Mauretania was painted wartime gray. Following through on their 1903 agreement, the Admiralty immediately requisitioned both Mauretania and Aquitania to serve as armed merchant cruisers. But it was almost immediately realized that despite the considerable investment made to fund these liners, they were unsuitable for the wartime role they were intended for. These doubts were quickly confirmed when on August 26th, the British cruiser HMS Highflyer caught up with the German liner Kaiser Wilhelm de Gross, which had already been converted to an armed merchant cruiser by the German Navy. After a brief firefight, the Kaiser Wilhelm de Gross ran out of ammunition and her crew was forced to abandon the liner. Whether she was scuttled or taken down by British fire is still debated, but what isn't debated is how ineffectual large passenger liners proved to be in armed hostilities. On top of their poor maneuverability and large vulnerable superstructures, these vessels also consumed a massive amount of fuel, far more than their contribution could justify. The Mauretania soon returned to passenger service, but after only a handful of voyages, she was laid up in Liverpool due to a lack of passengers. Her sister, RMS Lusitania, however, continued serving passengers on the North Atlantic as the war everyone thought would be over by Christmas dragged on. Then, as you probably already know, on May 7, 1915, the Lusitania was torpedoed off the southern coast of Ireland, killing 1,198 passengers and crew. The sinking was a major turning point in the war, helping turn the American public against Germany and priming them to enter the conflict 2 years later. Mauretania was ready to fill the void left by her lost sister, but the Gallipoli campaign prompted the need by the British government to transport huge numbers of troops. The Mauretania and several other liners were tapped to serve a much more natural role as troop ships. But as casualties mounted, Mauretania, along with Aquitania and Britannic, were ordered to serve as hospital ships. They were painted white with buff funnels and equipped with large medical cross emblems and illuminated signs to clearly identify their role to surrounding ships. In late 1916, she was returned to troop duties, transporting Canadian soldiers from Halifax to Liverpool, and when the United States entered the war in 1917, she transported American soldiers. In March 1918, she received her first dazzle paint scheme designed by Norman Wilkinson. The large abstract geometric designs were intended to confuse enemy ships. Mauretania's second dazzle scheme, sported through the end of the war, is one of my all-time favorites. After the armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, she continued to repatriate troops well into 1919. After the war ended, she was painted a drab gray and then returned to her full Cunard livery in mid-1919. Over the course of the war, Mauretania safely transported over 50,000 troops. While she never served the armed merchant cruiser role she was built for, her contribution to the war effort proved invaluable. Now, she was ready to return to her primary role as a luxury passenger liner. RMS Mauretania returned to passenger service on September 21, 1919. While she was in a rough state after years of wartime service, Cunard was desperate for revenue and eager to get passengers on their premier liner. But she was clearly far from her best and struggled to maintain the speed required to keep up with her busy schedule. On one crossing in April 1920, she sailed at an abysmal 17.81 knots. Then, on July 22, 1921, while docked in Southampton, a fire broke out in her first-class passenger spaces on E-deck. The fire was attributed to a workman who was smoking while cleaning a carpet with petrol or acetone. Ah, the good old days. The fire was quickly brought under control, but it impacted 3 decks and destroyed 50 cabins. Damage spread to her first-class smoking room, library, lounge, and dining saloon, and the smell of burnt timber and wool permeated the ship. This finally justified a much-needed refit, which began later that year at the Tyne shipyard. Her coal-burning boilers were converted to oil firing, and the fire damage was repaired. She returned to service in March 1922, but her turbines were still in major need of an overhaul, and she was once again pulled from service for another refit in 1923. While undergoing the work in Southampton, the shipyard workers went on strike. Cunard couldn't afford a delay, and the Mauretania was towed to Cherbourg, France, where the work was completed. She was returned to service in May 1924. These years were Mauretania's heyday. She continued to hold the Blue Riband and even bested her own eastbound speed record in August 1924, with a speed of 26.25 knots. Her reputation as the fastest liner on the Atlantic helped maintain her popularity with passengers. While older than most of her competition at the time, she was still seen as one of the most glamorous ways to cross the Atlantic. But as the decade continued, Mauretania soon faced a new generation of liners. In 1929, after holding the Blue Riband for an incredible 22 years, Germany's Bremen claimed the record. That same year, Mauretania made one last attempt to reclaim the prize. She came within only a fraction of a knot, but in the end, even after decades of refinement, she just couldn't compete with Bremen's superb engineering. Despite refits that improved her passenger spaces, the Mauretania felt increasingly dated when compared to the modern liners entering service at the time. With new competition and the Great Depression severely limiting passenger numbers, the Mauretania became a dedicated cruise ship in 1930 and was painted white to fit the role in 1932. In 1934, facing a dire economic situation, Cunard was forced to merge with the White Star Line. Numerous older vessels, including the Olympic, Homeric, and Majestic, were soon withdrawn from service. The Mauretania wasn't spared. She sailed her final eastbound voyage in September 1934 from New York to Southampton, where she was laid up alongside the Olympic to await her fate. Her furnishings were auctioned off, and on July 1, 1935, she left Southampton for the last time for Rosyth, Scotland, where she would be broken up. One of her former captains, Arthur Rostron of Titanic fame, came to see her off, but he refused to go aboard, stating that he preferred to remember her as she was in her prime. As she sailed for the breakers, she paused for half an hour at her birthplace on the Tyne, where she was greeted by massive mourning crowds. She arrived in Rosyth on July 4, 1935, and her engines were shut down for the last time with a dark final shudder. The public was allowed to tour the great liner before scrapping began, and a reported 20,000 people visited her. Her scrapping was controversial, and many high-profile people protested, including Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was himself a former loyal passenger. He kept a large detailed model of the ship, which is now on display at the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. He famously wrote, "Every ship has a soul, but the Mauretania had one you could talk to." By 1936, the great liner was gone. The Mauretania came from a time when the great ocean liners were deeply significant to the public, but there was something about her that earned an especially fierce love. Mauretania represented a simpler time. She symbolized a final tenuous link with the Edwardian age of innocence that would soon be crushed by the horrors of war. A time when feverish technological advancement was a marvel to be celebrated before such mechanization unleashed unprecedented horror on the world. While future liners would capture the public's imagination, they would never quite match the exuberant innocence of Mauretania.
It doesn't look any bigger than the Mauretania.
Hi, let me guess. You're a little bit mad at me for saying that she wasn't that luxurious. But hear me out. According to John Maxstone Graham, all those beautiful glass domes in all of her first-class public rooms, well, apparently the way they were frosted, combined with the gloomy North Atlantic weather, it would just cast all the rooms in a grayish-green light that kind of made them all look like fish tanks. And on top of all of that, they would collect condensation that would drip down into the spaces pretty much all the time. So, yeah. But enough Mauretania slander. If you're really mad at me, blame it on the heat. It is hot as shit. Is she your favorite? Do you prefer the Lusitania? I would love to know what you think. Let me know down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the like button. And if you haven't done so already, go ahead and subscribe. Nothing's stopping you. Alright crew, thank you so much for watching. Till the next one, be nice to people.
It's over 100 feet longer than Mauretania, and far more luxurious.